Washington has the most underrated wide receiving core in the Big Ten.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thanks for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And just a quick reminder to all you everydayers out there, wherever you're getting this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, wherever that may be, please make sure you go click that subscribe button, click that little bell as well, so you never miss when we post a new show. Plus, if you're on the audio only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as all that really does help the channel out a lot. Now, got a really fun show coming at all you out there today. Now we're back on this everyday schedule, which I do love so much. I want to talk about the NFL draft expectations next year for this team after Washington had just one player drafted in 2025. Spoiler alert, they're a lot higher. I also want to talk about some of the offensive line competitions that we're going to be watching when we get back out for fall camp in a few weeks. Guys like John Mills and Taulealea pushing for starting spots with Landen Hatchett and Paki Finau, also trying to make sure that they can secure that spot as well. But I want to get to that after I talk about some of these wide receivers, because I'm sure some of you heard that cold open and said, whoa, hold on a second. Washington has a preseason All-American in Denzel Boston. And that's absolutely right. And I'm not going to spend the majority of this program here talking about him because, or not the first segment at least, because we already know what Washington is getting in Denzel Boston. After he had 60 catches for 800 plus yards and 9 touchdowns last season, you know that you're getting a bona fide wide receiver one in that guy. The question is, what are you going to do around him? What are you going to do for Omari Williams to help him take that big step forward in his second season? We know the accuracy is there. He completed, 78% of his passes as a freshman. We know that he's got that talent in him. So you want to make sure you have a nice wide receiver core around him. That's why you go get an Omari Evans from the transfer portal out of Penn State, where he's got that starting experience, that Big Ten experience that you're looking for at the position. And you've got some young guys waiting in the wings like Rashid Williams. I start there because I think that's going to be the top 3 in terms of targets, in terms of catches for this unit this season. I want to throw a couple of numbers at you here. 33, 66, 90, and 63. That is the number of receptions that each Jedfish wide receiver 2 has pulled in his first 4 seasons as a head coach. So that's just something to keep an eye on as you get just into the weeds of the season, October, November. Just keep an eye on who is number 2 in targets, in catches, because that's going to be really telling. I have a feeling that by the end of the year, it might end up being Rashid Williams, because we saw him start to take that step forward last season. And I think that this is a guy who, as Omari Williams, you know you're getting another year out of him. You know you're probably going to end up getting another year out of Rashid Williams as well. Having those two guys in the fold together and trying to develop that chemistry for 2026 and beyond is going to be a really important factor as well, because I look at a guy like Omari Evans, and my bold prediction with him is I think he's most likely to lead this team in terms of yards per catch, because he's got the athleticism. He's got that deep speed that you need in order to stretch the defense and break plays over the top and everything like that. And I think that's going to end up being his most important role. So if he ends up with 40, 50 catches, somewhere in that regard, I'm not going to be super shocked, but I think that he's going to have a really high yards per target, yards per catch, all of those different sort of metrics that show that this is the guy who you want to get behind the defense. And I think that's something that's really important, because that's one of the biggest reasons that we saw Omari Evans enter the transfer portal and come from Penn State to Washington, even though they look like they're going to be the preseason number 1 team in the country and just one of the main contenders to go win the college football playoff. I think that it's something where when we look at what Omari Evans projects out as in terms of the next level, in terms of the NFL, so much of that comes back to he wasn't necessarily showcased the way that I think his skill set would like to be in that Penn State offense. So coming to Washington, we saw them throw him some fade balls early on in spring practice. We saw him use his physicality and his length to go win over smaller cornerbacks early in spring practice. We've seen him be able to stretch the field and do some different things. I'm excited to see what he's going to look at like in fall camp as well, since we saw him miss a good majority of spring practice as well due to an injury like Denzel Boston. But I look at a guy like Rashid Williams, and we saw what he was at different points during the season last year. We've seen him line up all over the formation at spring camp, at fall camp. And I think we're going to finally see him take that big step forward in year 3, a lot like we saw Denzel Boston do in 2024. I'm not saying it's going to be on that same level, but I think we're going to see such a massive uptick in terms of target share and things like that, that it's going to be really hard to ignore. And he's someone who's proven that he can make plays. He scored a touchdown against Iowa last year. He's got those big plays in him. We've seen it during practice, and I think that's something we're going to see this fall as well. But it doesn't come down to just those three guys. Washington has a really interesting receiving core because there are so many interesting names behind it. And I keep saying the word interesting is because a lot of them don't have that production at the college level yet. One guy who I think is a sleeper before I think into guys who are going to end up producing a little bit more this year is Justice Williams. Big, 6'4", 205, 210 pounds, versatile guy who you're probably going to end up mainly using on the outside, but has proven he can line up in different spots if need be. He's got the frame of someone who can be a really good run blocker at the college level on the outside, which is something that's going to help you see the field often, no matter what program you play in. And on top of that, having the NFL bloodlines of having a dad who played tight end in the NFL for the Oakland Raiders is really important as well. And we kind of saw that during spring camp this year. We saw him be that guy who can stretch the field and use that great speed after missing all of the 2024 season due to an injury he suffered in high school. So he's somebody who we might start to see those flashes this year. And then coming into 2026, like Rashid Williams, in my opinion, will break out this year. He's going to be that guy next year. So that's just something to keep an eye on as well if you start to see number 16 getting thrown out there a little bit more. And I look at that on the outside like I look at this combination of Kevin Green and Audric Harris in the slot, because both those guys are players this coaching staff is very high on. Like the Everydayers know, I mentioned on Monday that Kevin Cummings is enamored with the way Kevin Green Jr. is as a run blocker. So I think that's something that's really important. And on top of that, this staff clearly really likes Audric Harris as well, because even though he only played like 5-7 snaps a game, they were able to burn his red shirt in 2024 because they wanted to get him on the field early and often. So that's something that I think is going to be just something to keep in mind as we head into this 2025 season, is one of those guys is going to end up getting a higher target share in the slot. In my opinion, I think it's going to end up being Kevin Green, not just because he's a little bit more experienced. He played a little bit at Arizona in 2023 before following the coaching staff up following spring camp in 2024, but it's because he also just was that safety blanket for Demond Williams during fall camp last season before he suffered an injury that forced him to miss the majority of the season. He was that guy who, when Demond needed to roll out of the pocket, he always looked for Kevin Green first and used him as a check down option. And that's something that I don't think can be ignored. And as we just kind of project out what this wide receiver room is going to look like, that's something that I think will play a factor as we get into fall camp. Obviously, that's going to be a more telling sign as well as we see some of this alignment, because fall camp is also going to be really important for a pair of freshmen. Obviously, Washington had 5 incoming freshmen coming in at the position: Raiden Vines-Bright, Chris Lawson, Deji Jose, Marcus Harris, and Desmond Roebuck. But I'm only going to be talking about those first 2 names right now because they were 2 of the 3 who were able to enroll for spring practice, able to get in here early, go through winter workouts and all those sorts of things. And they both really impressed during spring camp. Chris Lawson was a guy who was really just really reliable throughout spring camp. He was determined with no matter who it was to make plays, whether it be Demond Williams, Kai Horton, Treston Keeney McMillan, Dash Byerly. No matter who the quarterback was, he found made a way to make plays for those guys and was in the end zone in seemingly every practice. He did a really tremendous job there. And while Raiden Vines-Bright, like Denzel Boston and like Omari Evans and Rashid Williams as well, who missed the last week and a half of camp, he was limited with an injury, but the way he performed in the spring game, I know I saw it from fans all over Twitter, was this guy needs to find a way to get on the field this year. The coaching staff needs to find a way to use him. And I absolutely agree. And I think that those guys are going to end up rounding out Washington's rotation, which is why I think it's such an underrated unit, is because it's so inexperienced, but there's so much talent in that room that just hasn't gotten a chance to shine yet. And I think coming this fall, we're going to see Demond Williams, who, like I said, is an extremely accurate quarterback, is going to get a chance to distribute the ball really well. I do believe that we're going to see that trend continue of a couple of guys that really hog the majority of the targets, the whole bunch of players below them that have 30, 35, 40 receptions, somewhere in that ballpark by the time the season is over. But there's so much to like about this wide receiver room. I think it's going to make a lot of noise this fall. And I would say the exact same about the offensive line. But we'll get to that right after a message from our good friends over at Game Time. We've all been there, logging on early and waiting forever for concert tickets to go on sale, only to lose your spot for a show you've been dying to see. Live music should be about making memories, not dealing with the stress of ticket shopping. That's where Game Time comes in. Game Time makes getting concert tickets faster and easier than ever. Prices actually drop as it gets closer to showtime, and you can save up to 60% off with their killer last-minute deals. And if you're tired of endless scrolling, trying to find the best deal, Game Time's Zone Deals picks the best seats in your section for you, which I personally love. It's a phenomenal deal. I love using those for baseball games. Here at T-Mobile Park, I used to go see Paul Skeens a couple of weeks ago when the Pittsburgh Pirates were in town. That was an absolute blast. Take the guesswork out of buying concert and show tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. The more I look at this offensive line, the more I believe that this group is going to be vastly improved than what we saw in 2024. Bold take, right? I know. It's hard to get worse than a group that allowed a Big Ten worst 38, 39 sacks, whatever the number was, in 2024. And I look at the group that Washington has assembled coming into 2025, and it's so much deeper and so much more talented. Where last year, and that's not a knock on any of the other guys, where you had to put together a roster through just the spring transfer portal period, which was mainly FCS players and guys that lost spots and kind of unfortunately washed out of other programs. And I'm not saying that about anyone in UW in particular. That's just what the spring portal was around the country in terms of offensive line prospects. And so I look at where Washington was last year and I look at where they are now, and there's so much more depth. That's thing number one. And it just asserts a point I was making on our mailbag show the other day about why I'm so confident in this offensive line taking a big step forward. Having such a mobile quarterback behind you in Damon Williams will certainly help mitigate some sacks because we're going to see him take a step forward in terms of some of the sacks he took last year against Oregon and against Louisville to what he's going to do in 2025, where I don't think he's going to have as much trouble holding onto the ball or, trying to make a play with his legs. I think he's going to do a really much better job of getting the ball out quickly, hitting receivers just early on in his progression, and not trying to get out of the pocket, trying to make a play like he did a few times last year. And when I look at left tackle, I think it's solid. I think Carver Willis is going to do a tremendous job over there. I think after having an entire spring to relearn how to play left tackle and carry that into the summer where we've seen him doing some different training outside of just UW as well, where he went really deep in depth with us in spring about what it was he needed to do and how his body just really adjusted to playing right tackle like he had been for 4 years before then. Now adjusting back over to left tackle is going to be a bit of a progression, but by the time the season rolls around at the end of August, I think he's going to be in a much better spot and is going to be more comfortable there. So I look at left tackle and I think you're set. At left guard, I think it's a different story. I think Paki Finau is the guy who's going to win the job. He was really impressive last fall, especially in the Sun Bowl, and he was really impressive in spring ball as well. But I look at John Mills behind him, and I really do think that you have a future star there along the offensive line, whatever position he ends up playing. And it's one of the reasons we saw Washington never give up on his recruitment, and they were able to flip him from Texas so late in the process. That's something that I think is really important here. And it's something that I think Jed Fish sold him on, was finding a way to get him on the field early, where I think late in blowouts, or some of these early games in the season, we're going to see a lot of John Mills, whether it be at left guard, or maybe we're going to even see him at left tackle once you pull out a guy like Carver Willis, where I think Soane Fasolo might get a couple of reps there. But I look at a guy like John Mills, and I think physically he proved everything he needed to in the spring, that he's ready for the competition of college football. And as we continue to move forward, he's going to try to get on the field more often, and I think he's going to have a case, but it's going to be really tough when a guy like Paki Finau is in front of him, because this coaching staff is absolutely enamored with him. And if they didn't have somebody like John Mills, who is just so physically ready to compete, even in a rotational role, that he would already have this job locked down. So that's something I'm really intrigued by with the left guard position. And I think it's something where we might even see other guys rotate in on that side of the ball, depending on what happens at right guard with Champ Taulealea, with Landen Hatchett, Zach Henning of the world, where there's going to be, there are only so many spots to go around on a starting offensive line, right? But I look at both these positions, and Washington just has so much more talent at these positions that you're going to want to rotate these guys to keep them fresh, to keep them healthy. And with Garrett Hatchett and Carver Willis both graduating and leaving after the season, you want to make sure that those positions are solidified in the long term as well. So you might as well find a way to get some of these younger guys on the field in some capacity throughout the year. And if it means burning a red shirt, so be it in Jedd Fisch's thought process, because you would rather have a guy get that experience now, even if it is late in Big Ten games against the Rutgers and Purdue's of the world, because then all of a sudden in 2026, when you need them to step into a bigger role, you're not going to necessarily have as big of a learning curve because they have 6, 7, 8 games under their belt. And that's something that I think Jedd Fisch has really been good about emphasizing throughout his time coaching college football as a head coach in Arizona and now with UW. And I think that's something that's going to continue this season. And this is I think the best talent that he's ever had to do that with, where obviously his unit at Arizona was able to develop Jordan Morgan, Wendell Moy, Jonah Savanaya. But I think this group of talents can be just as good, if not better, headlined by those two guys in Champ and John Mills. And so that's something where I think this coaching staff is so happy with where they are now in terms of the depth, and the inexperience certainly brings questions, just like at wide receiver, which is why I wanted to talk about these units back to back. But I think it's going to be something where throughout the year, we're going to see this group take a step forward and play with more chemistry and play more in sync because they've had so much more time to work together and practice together as opposed to last season. At center, I think it's pretty cut and dry. I think we're going to see a lot of Landen Hatchett. I'm really excited about him. I know I referenced him a few weeks ago as a guy who I think we need to talk about more coming into fall camp, because last year he was coming off the torn ACL and he was more working about getting healthy than it was, being in a place where he could improve his body and get back out there for college football, because he just needed to work to be medically cleared. That's not the case this season. And I think we're going to see him really live up to the trust that Ryan Grubb, Washington's former offensive coordinator, had also instilled in him during the 2023 season, when he talked just like Jedd Fisch was and said, this guy is going to be part of our rotation as a true freshman. And he was. And to be a part of that offensive line, that Joe Moore award-winning offensive line, I think that shows what kind of potential Landen Hatchett has when he was sitting behind a guy who's a preseason All-American the last couple of years in Parker Brailsford. So I think that Washington fans are going to be really, really happy with where the center position is at by the time we even get to the end of September, when Landen has had more time to just play his natural position of center. And then we look at the right guard position. That's where I think we're going to see the most amount of competition, because if you go check out an interview our guy Lars Hansen did with Garrett Hatchett back in March at a NIL event, one of the things that Garrett said was he just wanted to make sure he could come back and play college football with his brother, and he'll let the rest of it figure itself out. Now, if that's starting, so be it. And if that's playing as a backup to a Zach Henning or to a Champ Taulealea, so be it as well. He just wanted to make sure he was back in a place where he was comfortable alongside family to play out his final days of college football. And I think that's why this was such a good addition for Washington, was because it wasn't somebody you needed to go and recruit super hard and break the bank for, but you can also still add that veteran depth to your offensive line who understands the culture of Washington, all those different things that you're looking for in Garrett Hatchett, while also not clogging up the room long term, and having a guy like Champ Taulealea, because I think Zach Henning in the long run is going to end up a little bit more at center than he will at right guard. Having a guy like Champ who can just as well step in, and even I think he's more physically ready than John Mills is right now. I have a couple of questions about him as a pass protector, but I think he's come a very long way since enrolling at Washington. So I'm really encouraged to see what it's going to look like for him this coming season. And having a guy like Garrett in front of him gives him a really great experienced mind to learn from and to pick his brain as he just continues to grow and progress into what could be a starting role in 2026. So having those two guys there, I feel confident in saying that Washington is just going to take such a big step forward across the offensive line, not just because of that experience and veteran leadership that you have, but because of the young talent, where if that's the kind of position where by the middle of October, we're seeing Garrett Hatchett and Champ Taulealea rotate from series to series. Is that necessarily an optimal offensive line? Not really, but if that's what you want to do to keep guys healthy and keep getting players experience, I think that's something that Jedd Fisch, Jimmy Doherty, and Michael Switzer are going to be willing to explore at that position. And then that leads us to right tackle, where I think this coaching staff is really confident in Drew Party, where last year it kind of felt like he was the one talent who was supposed to hold together a young, inexperienced offensive line after he got a couple games under his belt at San Diego State, was a highly rated transfer portal product. But this year, I feel like he's ready to take a step forward. And if not, I think this coaching staff is really happy with where Maximus McCree has come along after transferring from Iowa Central Community College before last season. And after being out of football for 18 months, he really does look like he's finally back in football shape, which is what originally led him to Maryland and to get some action in the Big Ten. And now that he's back at that playing weight, at everything that he needs to be in terms of the off field and the physical and the mental capacity after, again, not playing the game for almost 2 years, I think that's really important to note here, because having that third swing tackle is somebody who has played left tackle and can step in for Carver Willis if need be, but also is ready to take over at right tackle if Drew Party struggles or if he goes down with an injury or anything like that. I think that's really important because I look at the rest of this unit. Sowane Fasolo, Jack Schaefer are a couple names that come to mind. I think you really like the potential of some of those guys long-term. I think Schaefer is ready to play a couple of games if needed this fall, but I think there's a bit of a long-term projection out there. And having a guy like Max, who has enough experience under his belt from last season as well, and really did look good in stretches. I referenced the Michigan game where I think he looked really solid, especially early in that contest. And then, of course, he has the unfortunate dislocated thumb against Iowa that kept him out for the majority of the rest of the year. And I just think that having those guys and having all this depth, that's the point I've really been trying to hammer home here. And I hope you agree, and leave a comment down below if you don't. I'd love to hear from you. But I look at all these things and I just think that this offensive line has gotten so much better and so much deeper. And just from in the point of 12 months, Jedd Fisch has done such a good job of turning this unit over that I can't help but be excited and think it's ready to take a big step forward in 2025. And by the time the NFL draft rolls around next April, I think Washington is going to be getting a ton of hype. We all know how much Jedd Fisch loves to talk about developing guys, getting them to the next level, getting them to the NFL. And I think that that's something where, following the 2023 season, we saw Washington have a historic 2024 NFL draft and all that extra turnover with Kalen DeBoer leaving, guys going elsewhere, everything like that led to only one player in the 2025 NFL draft being Carson Bruner. That's not going to be the case this season. And I think it's going to be the perfect way for Jedd Fisch to really showcase what his program is all about. And when we see, all these recruits talk about wanting to get to the NFL, I think that this is the draft that Jedd Fisch is really going to be able to point to and say, this is what I was able to do just across my time as a head coach in college football, because we're going to see some of his Arizona guys get drafted from the 2022 recruiting class he loves to talk about. And we're going to see some of his Washington guys get drafted as well, where we look at a guy like Denzel Boston. That's why I didn't want to talk about him earlier. I think that he's got a real opportunity to be the number one wide receiver taken in this draft. Right now, I think that spot's held by Jordan Tyson from Arizona State. But Denzel, especially with the way that he ended his season last year, I think it's something where if you listen to, shout out to my good buddy Connor Rogers over at the NFL Stock Exchange podcast, when a lot of these NFL scouts are starting their early evaluations for the 2026 draft, they look at the back half of the season, they say, oh, well, Denzel had 9 touchdowns for the first 6-7 games, whatever it was. And then his production really fell off, where he only had 1 game over 50 yards for the remainder of the season. Part of that was due to injury, part of that was due to offensive line and different things like that. So a lot of that was out of his control. And I think that that's one thing where if we see Denzel step up and have a very consistent season where he does get over 1,000 yards, he does break into double-digit touchdowns, and is one of the, let's just call it top 3 to 5 players in the conference in terms of catches, yards, touchdowns, everything like that, that we're going to see him take a big step forward and not only establish himself as a first-round pick, but with his frame, with his size and speed and everything that he brings to the table as a route runner as well. I think we're going to see him solidify himself as a first-round pick and really just establish that he is a guy who can just be a game changer at the NFL level as well. Now, another guy that I want to talk about in that same light, who I don't necessarily know if he's going to go in the first round, mainly just due to the NFL's view on running backs at this point in time, is Jonah Coleman. And this is where Jed Fish can point to his development, as Jonah, being a former 3-star when he was recruited at Arizona, has developed into one of the top running backs in the country. And it's one of those things where if you go look at the evaluations, he is ranked among the top 3, top 5 running backs in terms of NFL draft potential, not just because of his ability as a runner, his ability to play through contact and make guys miss, where he's got one of the highest forced missed tackle rates in the country, according to Pro Football Focus, but it's what he does as a pass blocker as well. I remember him telling us this spring when we asked him about his confidence knowing the offense and teaching it to everybody else. He told all the guys in the media scrum that, hey, if you guys want, I'll get you on the board right now and I can teach you the offense. I know it that well. So it's good to see him know that part of the game as well, where he's a guy where he's listed at 5'9", 224, 225, I think it is right now, where I think some teams are going to try to knock his height a little bit, but because of how physically he plays, I don't think that that's something that's going to be an issue at the NFL level. And while he's going to have to compete with some big name backs in terms of the NFL draft, whether it be Jeremiah Love from Notre Dame, Nicholas Singleton at Penn State, whoever it is that you believe might be the number 1 running back in the class, I think that Jonah has the skill set and what is needed to succeed at the NFL level to compete with those guys and say, I can be the number 1 running back off the board with another strong season. And I think that even though he might have a decreased workload this season because of Damon Williams' ability as a runner, because of what Adam Muhammad and Jordan Washington bring to the field as well, I think we're going to see Jonah really shine in terms of what NFL scouts think about him, where his evaluation is. And by the end of the year, I really do believe that he's going to end up being selected at the very worst by the end of the second round and is going to wind up as a top 50 pick. I talked a lot about Tacario Davis on yesterday's show, but I got to give him a quick shout out as well, the cornerback transfer from Arizona, who with a strong year this year, I know one of the reasons he said he came back was he wasn't really happy with where he was at the end of last year, even though he was a second team all Big 12 kind of player, that he thinks he's got All-American potential in him this year. And I think reuniting with John Richardson will help him get back to some of the things that helped him be one of the nation's leaders in pass breakups in 2023 when he had 16 of them. And he just didn't necessarily look as fluid last year, where I don't think he was doing anything wrong per se. It just looked a little bit different in terms of the way that he was coached. And under John Richardson, I really do believe that Washington has an opportunity to have the top wide receiver and top cornerback off the board in this class. I kind of breezed through Tacario Davis a little bit there because I talked about him a lot on yesterday's show. As the Everydayers know, if you didn't get a chance to listen to that one, go back and listen to it because I think Tacario is going to be the nation's top cornerback this year across college football. He just has that kind of upside in this Ryan Walters defense. I also want to make sure I spend a few minutes on guys who I don't think are getting the kind of love that they deserve right now from the NFL. And the number 1 guy on that list is Tacario Davis's running mate, Ephesians Prysock. I look at Prysock, and I think that he's somebody who, as of right now, probably sitting in the late day 3 to priority undrafted free agent sort of range after dealing with an injury last season and being asked to be the number 1 cornerback. And I don't think that he was necessarily very suited for that role. One of the reasons was I think he needed to continue to add weight and continue to improve as a tackler a little bit last season. And I think that's something that we're going to see more of this fall. I think we're going to see him play with a lot more confidence, having a running mate in Davis who he has such good chemistry with. So that's something that I think is really going to help impact him. And if he's able to add a few more pounds to his frame and really just be able to play freely as that cornerback too, where he's going to play a lot of press man coverage, do what he does best at. He's somebody who can be a middle of the road day 3 selection, like a round 4, 5, 6 kind of player, because I think teams are going to look at his traits when he gets to the NFL Combine in February of next year, and they're going to say, we can't pass on a guy like this because it's 6'3", 6'4", 195, 200 pounds with that kind of ball skills, with that sort of length that he has. He's somebody who can be an impact player on the outside at the NFL level as NFL receivers continue to grow. And we're not seeing as many of those inside guys. We're seeing way more players thrive in that 6'1", 6'2", 6'3" sort of mold in that Denzel Boston range. And that's something where having somebody like Ephesians Prysock, who has the length to compete with these guys for jump balls in the red zone, is something that's going to be really important. But he also has the ability to flip his hips and run with them. So as I just kind of watch this draft cycle play out, that's somebody who I think is going to end up being a big feather in the cap of John Richardson when, in my opinion, he hears his name called next April in the 2026 NFL draft. And those are all things that are going to speak to Washington's development. And here's another one that I wanted to make sure I cover before we get out of here, and that's defensive tackle Anterio Thompson. I look at just where this class is sitting right now, and after what was a really strong year along the defensive line in terms of the 2025 NFL draft, where we saw a tremendous amount of defensive tackles go early, these impact sort of guys, Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, Derek Harmon being a couple that Washington had to face all of them because of course they did at different points last season. I don't think Anterio Thompson is in that mold. That's unfair to compare him to three guys that went in the first round. But when you look at his size, his physical profile, and his athleticism, I think he's somebody who can find a way to make an impact as a traditional 4-3 sort of defensive tackle at the NFL level. And I think he's going to prove that this year in a Ryan Walters defensive scheme where he's going to play a little bit of 3-tech, a little bit of 4-eye, some 5, just have him moving around in a few different alignments is something that's going to help him out greatly as he tries to continue to improve his stock for the NFL level. And being in a situation like he will be at Washington, where we're going to see a lot of these 5-man fronts that are going to ask him to play in one-on-ones against offensive guards, against centers, is something that could really work to his benefit. Because that was the number one thing that jumped out to me during spring was just how strong he was. That combined with a really, really, really high motor. Yes, I had to say it that many times because he does give that all-out sort of effort on every single play. And when you combine all those things, that's exactly what the NFL is looking for on the interior of the defensive line. And he's somebody who is certainly flying under the radar right now, where after his time at Iowa, where he was able to make an impact on special teams, but didn't consistently get in the rotation along the defensive line, dropping down to Western Michigan certainly seemed to help him prove himself before coming back to Washington. I think he has all the potential needed to wind up as a contributor at the NFL level. And I think it's one of those things where with a strong season, he's going to be one of those guys that you take a risk on the back end of day 3 because he can be a really solid rotational defensive tackle when you need somebody who can pin his ears back and rush the passer while still filling gaps when need be. But I think he's going to be a lot more effective at the next level as just a true pass rusher for the most part, where he can command those double teams because of the strength that he brings to the table with his bull rush and different things like that. That at the next level, he's going to find a way to try to make an impact. And Washington is going to do a really good job of showcasing that this year. That's all I got for you today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really do appreciate it and for really working hard to make sure this channel is in the best place possible before the season, because we've just got a few weeks left before fall camp. And if you want to make sure you're in tune with everything going on in the world of Husky athletics, please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast. So that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So please make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you never miss when we post a new video, and make sure you hit that subscribe button as well. And if you're on the audio only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as it does help the channel out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll talk to you on Wednesday.